Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our participants from all over the world. My name is Wangari. I'm the Community of Practice Consultant for the UN Women Training Center, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar on climate action and training for gender equality. So we are very lucky to have today Dr. Lucy Ferguson as our moderator and 4 expert panelists. You can see their names on the screen right now, and Eunice is actually going to be their first panelist, and then everyone else is going to speak in alphabetical order. So you can also participate in this webinar if you're listening live, and you can ask questions using the questions feature of Zoom, which is right at the bottom of your screens. And you can also note that this webinar is going to be recorded and posted on the UN Women Training Center's YouTube channel. So you can watch it back or share it with your networks as well. So I'm going to hand over to Lucy now, who's going to introduce our speakers and our topic for today.
Thank you very much, Ria. It's a pleasure to be here with you to talk on this topic, which we think is bringing together a couple of themes which haven't been systematically worked on yet by the UN Women Training Center. We have a series of virtual dialogues as well as a community of practice, which is quite active for those working in the field of training for gender equality. This is our second virtual dialogue in 2021, and we consider that virtual dialogues are a key part of our participatory approach to knowledge generation, knowledge transfer, knowledge sharing and exchange, which we consider to be an important part of transformative change for gender equality. The discussion topic for today is climate action and training for gender equality. The climate crisis is, as we know, the most challenging current and emerging crisis that we have upcoming for the future. And we also know that climate change's impact is gendered in 2 ways, in terms of impact and also in terms of how the negotiations are shaped and how the climate response is implemented and policies formed. So there are a huge amount of gendered aspects of the climate response and climate action. So we're particularly interested today in these gender responsive solutions, and particularly what part can training for gender equality play in those. We believe that training is a transformative tool that can form part of a broader transformative change process. And we're strongly committed to training as a tool for increased gender equality and, in this case, climate action. So today we have 3 key questions that we want to explore, which Ruya has already shared through the concept note. The first question, why is training for gender equality a relevant strategy for advancing climate action? Secondly, what practical examples do we know and can we draw on of using training for gender equality to support climate action? And third, how can we leverage the transformative potential of training to address the climate crisis and advance with climate action? We have 4 expert panelists today. We're really pleased to have them all with us. Please remember that at any time during the presentations, you can submit questions either through the chat or through the question and answers facility, and Ruya will be collecting your questions. I'm first of all delighted to introduce our first speaker, Eunice Wangari Muneri. Eunice is a doctoral researcher at the Institute of Development Studies, IDS, Resource Politics and Environmental Change Cluster. She's worked on gender, climate and sustainable finance in food and agriculture, pastoralism and development sectors for 15 years. So Eunice, over to you. Thank you very much and welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucy. As you've mentioned, that I'm a doctoral researcher in IDS, and I'm also part of the Wellbeing, Ecology, Gender and Community Innovation Training Network, which is an EU-funded consortium of feminist political ecology scholars, practitioners and activists working on various environmental and feminism issues across the globe. And my research and training focuses on gender and climate change adaptation, and I will give some insights from my work on the relevance of gender training in advancing climate action. Next slide, please. Yeah, the question on what makes gender training what makes training for gender equality a relevant strategy for advancing climate action can be answered in multiple ways depending on the audience or on the sector where the training is being done. It has been established that gender inequality is central to climate change, whether it is in vulnerability, adaptation, or in mitigation. When establishing these linkages several decades ago, gender and environmental scholars demonstrated that individuals and collectives' ability to prepare for, avoid, cope, and recover from climate shocks and stressors is dependent on how resources and opportunities are distributed, how labor is divided, and their involvement in decision-making processes. However, for some reason, these linkages are either poorly understood or ignored in the climate arena. Often, gender equality issues are treated as the sideshows and have often been asked why I am bringing women issues to climate change discussions. To me, this demonstrates a huge gap in understanding the interconnected nature of these issues. As gender trainers, we may think of ways of demystifying these interlinkages and communicate them in ways that diverse actors and stakeholders can clearly understand the centrality of gender in climate action. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I was thinking about some of the approaches we as gender trainers may use to demystify these linkages. And I wanted to share some that I use and the diverse results that they have. A common entry point for feminists is a climate justice angle, which claims that it is our moral responsibility to prioritize the needs of the most vulnerable to climate change in order to achieve justice, highlighting how disproportionately women, especially those who rely on natural resources to fulfill their socially ascribed roles, are often affected by climate shocks and stressors, may serve as a conversation starter or training entry point. However, this has been overused, especially in the development arena, and tends to portray these women as passive victims, which may lead to their exclusion in designing and implementing interventions, and thereby denying their agency. Hence, I have found the framing of leaving no one behind as a powerful way of discussing the removal of barriers to women's access and political agency. The other point of entry that I often use is a positive evidence of women's contribution in either mitigation or adaptation action. In the community that I work with, gender roles are quite distinct. Hence, women and men have acquired different knowledges and skills about the changing environment. Women are the first to know when the water levels are low because they frequently fetch water for their domestic use. They also notice when the pastures are not enough, when the milk produced by the cows is less, and they're also able to identify new symptoms or pests on the livestock as they milk and inspect them every day. So these kinds of knowledges are quite relevant when designing interventions, but they can only be useful by including women at all levels of climate action. However, it is also important to recognize that women already engage in the bulk of unpaid care work, and their participation should not be an added burden to them. So I often propose to compensate women who participate in these climate action events for their time. At the global level, one could highlight the differences between countries reducing emissions and their percentages of female elected leaders or gender equality in general in the country to draw such kind of positive evidence and connections. Another approach that I use is linking the gender equality training to the organization's climate change or sustainability agenda. These two are the topmost agendas in most organizations today, as they've been forced to comply with the legislation or to bow to mounting pressures. So liaising with the function units who are driving these agendas to co-produce the training materials or to be part of the training itself has been quite helpful in terms of attracting participants that would have otherwise not attended a gender training event. Most of our gender trainings tends to be predominantly attended by women, unlike the climate change trainings, which makes these internal collaborations a great opportunity and a critical point to disseminate information. The people driving these agendas are also keen on collaborations and may perceive gender training and equality as one of the low-hanging fruits to meeting the organization's sustainability goals. From my experience, explaining gender and climate change connection often sparks interest of many of the attendees. And for me, one opportunity that has emerged from this mainstreaming is conducting a masterclass for new recruits as often as part of their onboarding events. In such classes, I train them on gender as well as sustainability and climate change issues. At times, I also find it helpful to invite other trainers to share their experiences from other contexts, and the response has been quite remarkable so far. So doing the trainings as stories rather than calling them training, but maybe telling them it's time to share the stories, has also received a more positive reception from the people being trained, especially on climate change and gender issues. So overall, I see a huge opportunity for gender training to advance climate action. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you as well, Eunice, for your absolutely perfect timing. Spot on 7 minutes. That was a really insightful presentation. Thank you. And I really like the ways that you shared these practical ideas with us of how we can work on these issues in gender training contexts. I'm going to now pass to Darmista Chauhan as our second speaker. Darmista is going to share her own screen. Darmista is an economist by training who has over 20 years of experience in the field of gender and community-led sustainable development. And she's also the author of the Arrow and UN Women Training Manual and on Gender and Climate Resilience. Darmista, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Lucy, and it's without much ado. Good morning to everybody, and I would really like to take forward the discussion from what Eunice shared on her experience of why climate action and trainings for gender equality really are a sort of cooperation and collaboration that needs to be taken forward. Building on what she said, I think everybody can see my screen?
Well, we could, but it's disappeared now. Let me know if you want me to share mine.
Okay, yeah, let me just try once again. I'll just, okay. Can you see it?
Not yet.
No, let me see if I can try to. Do you think maybe it's a video issue? Maybe we can try.
Okay, or Lucy, can you share it? It's okay, I'll just.
Yes, no problem.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So building on what I think my computer just got. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So building on what Eunice said, can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, I just want to reinstate the fact that gender as a part of climate change is something which is a right in itself. So it is important for everybody to start thinking about gender aspects in climate change. All genders need to be involved as equal partners and actors in the resilience building process, because as Eunice also shared and everybody of us knows that climate change impacts people who have least contributed to it, women, girls, children, who are least, which results in a whole climate injustice. And much of this is due to the existing gender roles, differentiated gender roles, responsibilities, the power structures which exist in the society. So climate change in itself is a right. Can we go to the next slide, please? Gender equality itself it's important in its own right as a part of climate change. But even more importantly, gender equality is very important. Knowledge of gender is very important for efficient climate action. See, we all know a lot about climate change, but climate action or resilience building is not about building resilience of cities or towns or villages, beaches, and islands, but it's actually about people. And it is people who are going to be affected and people who have to take action on climate change. So, understanding climate change is one thing, but doing something about it is quite different. And this doing something actually requires a whole transition from knowledge to action, which needs a very deeper understanding of what are the human conditions, needs a deeper understanding of the structural and deep rooted changes in the way decisions are taken. So when we say business as usual, what it means to have business as usual, how decisions in business as usual are taken in the climate change context. It's very important to understand all these things. And we all know that gender identity is often the most defining factor for this human condition, whether it is behavior or attitudes, whether it is knowledge or information, whether it is roles and responsibilities, access and control. I mean, there is a reason why women prefer water conservation and quality issues over men preferring irrigation issues, because the roles are very different. Women are more associated with having water security for the family, where men are more associated with having income security for the family, which is why they prefer irrigation and agriculture and more cash crops, whereas women prefer more food crops. So it's gender identity is very important defining factor of human condition, which influences the way humans have an effect on the environment and the decisions which we take. And this is very important from a climate action perspective. And gender trainings are the most widely available strategy which have the potential to influence all of these. Now, why I say that, I just want to take you a little bit theoretical into the way a human mind works. So the human mind actually has two systems. One is system one and the other is system two. The system one is an unconscious automatic reactive system, which is, where we, all our learnings, all our stereotypes, all our biases, all our trainings are very active in play. So the moment you step on the road and there is a horn, there is an automatic, you hear a horn, there is an automatic tendency to push back, go back on the footpath. So that's a natural system. Human decisions are normally taken by the system one, which is what we are trained to do as a result of the social conditioning process, as a result of the media influence that we have in our life, but our mind is trained to do automatically. Now, this system one is very agile, and this is what guides the business as usual approach. All the decisions are taken based on the system one, and it actually keeps on pushing for a status quo. Things should happen the way it has been happening, the way we have been taught. For any change to happen in the way things are happening, we need to have our system two activity. Now, the system two is actually a conscious and analytical system, which are the part of our mind, the rational part of our mind, which is conscious about our biases, which is sensitive towards what is happening to other people, which is sensitive to the nature, which looks at why things are happening, which analyzes things and then takes decisions. Unfortunately, the system two is a very lazy part of our mind. So it is very important that the system two is constantly activated. And I think gender trainings are a very strong tool to activate the system two. Now, why do I say that? If you see, climate change actually requires a behavior change communication, a whole consumer education process. It won't work. This BCC in climate change will not work in a way it works for the general thing where you say that, oh, brand A is better than brand B because of these reasons. You see an advertisement and you just pick up the product that you like to. The general information and option provision process which leads to action is something which we respond to by using our system one. And that will not work in the case where you actually want climate action to happen. If you want climate action to happen by people actually taking action on mitigation, by people actually taking action for adaptation, you need to have a whole change in attitude and knowledge. And this attitude and knowledge change, for that to happen, you need education and awareness. You need a consciousness of the system too. And gender trainings, actually the way they are designed. What do you do in a gender training, right? You sensitize people to their biases. You train them to challenge the social conditioning process. You train them to challenge the existing stereotypes. So you're actually activating the whole system one. You're actually training them. We actually provide them different kind of tools to do analysis on how different sectors, the roles and responsibilities of men and women are different. We actually have tools to analyze how different sectors impact men and women differently, what the access and control over resources between men, women, and other genders are different. So we are actually consciously and systematically activating the system too. And I think that is something which is very, very, very important for climate action to happen. And that is why gender trainings can actually help influence the whole BCC process in terms of pushing for climate action. So it has a whole potential, the potential to challenge the status quo bias, the potential to change the systematic thinking, systematic processes that are going on, address structural issues and root cause understandings. I mean, this is one training which actually, even before climate change happened, had been challenging the whole patriarchal system, had been challenging the whole existing economic systems. So it is actually challenging business as usual. It has tools, it has techniques, it has methodology in place to challenge all these systems. It is used across the board. It can be used at household level, at society level, at community level, at country level, at national level, at international level. It can be used in the business sector. It can be used in the rural sector. So you have these tools which are across the board. You can very easily build on them to actually make them more better in the context of climate change. And I think there are some things which we need to keep in mind if we want to really make the gender trainings applicable, better applicable in the climate action sector. The first is need to move beyond the binary gender understanding and to start talking beyond men and women, to look at other sexual identities, to look at LGBTIQ plus communities, to address intersectionalities within the whole gender concept. I think this is something which is again started to happen in the whole gender training process. We are talking very strongly about intersectionalities, but our training systems, our training methodologies need to gear up to that. We need to start encouraging localization. A lot of data still is at the national or international level. We need to start creating systems where we start getting data at the local level so that our gender trainings can be more customized to the audience, which will be very important when we're talking about and last but not the least, I think we also need to look at how the gender training modules and the content can actually be adapted to the whole online module. Because a lot of these processes were, geared for sensitizing people, creating an enabling learning environment, an empathetic creating environment, and which is very important for climate action. How do we transfer this into the whole online platform? And I just want to share from a few of my work experiences of how we have tried to do this different. So one of the tools that we use is the simple gender training tools, that gender analysis tools that we have, Moser framework, Harvard framework, the whole matrix banking framework. We have customized these specifically for being used in the climate change sector. So using the Moser framework, dividing the productive and reproductive work, and then asking people how climate change is affecting the productive work of women, asking them how it is affecting the reproductive work of women, asking them how it is affecting the productive work of men, asking them how it is affecting the reproductive work of women, and then bringing this whole debate about that climate change is not only about working on the production side, but also working on the care economy. And a lot of the environmental conservation activities, whether it is on the mitigation or on the adaptation side, comes from dealing with addressing the care economy issue. So I think that is something which has worked very well, at least at the community level, whether it is in the rural and urban sector. Another thing which I found really works is, as Eunice was also sharing, collaborating at a sectoral approach. So instead of having a gender and climate change training, when you have a very specific training, and we have actually gone to the level of having a training on gender and geohydrological issues, where we got community men and women together to work with geohydrological scientists. And the scientists were actually from Germany, and our people were from a slum in Jaipur, India. A small slum in Jaipur, India. These people coming together to understand how our water system works, how our geohydrological system works, and then understanding the gender implications of all this together actually help them come up with solutions which they were then implementing. And I just want to highlight the results that have come out of this kind of discussion. It's like poor women actually started talking about having paid water systems. They started talking about having water meters. They started talking about having water filters in their home. So it was a whole change in something, water, which was considered to be, oh, we will never be able to get free and quality water. From there, they had started to come, yes, we will fight for our rights to get free and quality water, good quality water. We will get enough quantity of water and we will pay for it. Yeah, this is my last slide. The other, I will just finish on my last thing. The other thing which I really felt gender training can be very useful is when they are used as a planning tool. And I want to share an example where we were doing a project on agriculture tools and equipment libraries, particularly to address the new climate problems that are coming up. And a lot of the things that were coming up from the community is that we need to have a lot of tractors and thrashers and all these, mechanized systems, because now it is becoming very difficult to use labor to do agriculture activities, because the weather is changing and we have to take decisions very quickly. But during the project planning stage, once the concept note and the initial concept note and everything was ready, we actually did, with the people who were doing the designing of the project and the communities, a gender training on agriculture. Very simply using the Harvard framework for them to understand what is the role of men and women in agriculture. And the whole project changed. From talking about this huge equipments, they started talking to what are the equipments that are required for organic farming, what are the equipments that are required for better farmings, what are the equipments that are required to reduce the burden on men and women in terms of their labors. So gender training as a planning tool when you're designing for climate projects, I think that is also something which can be very successful. And last but not the least, as everybody knows, trainings actually creates a resource pool of champions, whether these are children, whether these are government officials. I have found personally that when you train somebody on gender issues, they become your champion on gender aspects. And when you train somebody who is working on climate action on gender issues, they will become your champion not only on gender aspects, but also on gender responsive climate action, which will actually create a whole arena in terms of promoting gender responsive sustainable development across the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Darmista, for your presentation, for sharing so many examples as well from practice. It's really helpful, and the theoretical approach as well. I'm very pleased to give a warm welcome to Kiara Daniels. Kiara Daniels is policy specialist on gender and environmental finance with UNDP. She's also worked with the Global Environment Facility Gender Partnership to develop a free online course on gender and the environment. Kiara, welcome.
Thank you so much, Lucy, and I'm really enjoying hearing from the fellow panelists. So it's wonderful to be here, and I'd like to share some thoughts from my perspective working with UNDP, working with developing countries to help access financing to address climate change and environment issues and ensuring that that work advances gender equality. We could go to the next slide. Thank you. So, as we think about this topic, it's important to address it and think about it in a world that's facing really multiple intersecting crises. So if we could just step back for a moment, we've talked about the rise in global temperatures, and that's coupled with massive biodiversity loss, unsustainable use of natural resources, extreme weather events, water crises, involuntary migration, of course, increasing inequalities. And so the kind of integrated and multidisciplinary approach that we're talking about today, and I really think gender expertise brings that multidisciplinary approach, is really important. And I would say the way forward where we see hope and possibility when we're thinking about this really challenging topic. Next slide, please. I just want to zoom in more on gender and climate finance, more specifically. That's really what I work on and what UNDP supports developing countries in. And there's really been a significant important shift in the past 10 years or more, with an increasing focus on addressing gender equality and gender issues as part of both climate and environmental financing. So I'm showing here a graph from a report from the Heinrich Böll Foundation, which has a lot of really good material on gender and climate finance. And since the Cancun Agreement in 2010, agreed on at the climate change conference then, all of the major climate financing entities including the Global Environment Facility, the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, have policies and requirements to address gender as part of their finance activities. And so related to this, the major multilateral environment and climate agreements like the UNFCCC, which hosts those climate change conferences, their timelines shown in the upper half of this graphic here, so, as well as the major global environmental agreements like the Convention on Biodiversity, the Land Degradation Convention, so forth, have developed their own gender action plans to showcase their priorities on gender issues. And none of these developments happened in a vacuum, of course. Global and local feminist movements all supported this push, and we can expect gender equality as being a climate issue to be a focus more and more. So some of the key takeaways here are that countries and entities that want to access financing from the climate financing mechanisms like the Green Climate Fund must show that they are able to deliver on gender equality as part of this work, that they have policies, strategies, expertise, and architecture in place. So these entities and countries really need gender training and gender expertise to do so. They have to develop robust gender analysis for their funding proposals and deliver on those gender action plans during implementation. There's really been a lot of progress in this area, particularly around designing projects. I think the last panelist spoke about this a bit. Designing projects will really show work that planned work on gender equality. I think now the attention really needs to be paid on implementing that work, delivering, say, the activities in a gender action plan, monitoring and reporting on them, linking them to country level priorities, feeding that back into and improving country level policies. So we can expect to see even more of an increased focus on gender and climate action going forward. We could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I want to focus and share a little bit on UNDP's work in nature, climate, and energy, and what we see contributing to gender equality in those areas. So here we have the 5 priority areas where UNDP is advancing gender equality through climate action, particularly in work on energy, climate change adaptation, and nature positive solutions. And I hope it's helpful for gender specialists and gender practitioners to see these areas to understand the specific entry points for gender equality in this type of work. So first, around increasing women's decision making and leadership in natural resource management and climate resilience governance. Much of this work is at the subnational and local levels, for example, supporting women to join local water or land committees in decision-making roles, supporting the development of quotas for women's roles in those committees. Of course, those committees make important decisions for the community, like about where a new water source might be placed, and women's voices need to be included. This is also a really important issue at the global and national level. Lucy mentioned the recent climate change conference in Glasgow, and of 140 delegations, heads of delegations, only 10 were women at that conference. Only about a third of environmental protection ministries globally are made up of women. So about 33% of the staff are women. And so we need more women really involved at that decision-making level and in climate and environment policy making. Next, around gender responsive policy and planning development, linked to the first priority area, of course, it's really important to ensure that upstream work developing national climate, environment, energy policies are gender responsive, informed by gender analysis. This is important at the subnational level, of course. And next, closing gender gaps in access to and control of resources. And this is not only natural resources like water and land, fuel, but also other resources like knowledge, technology, education, infrastructure. This is probably the most common focus of our work, and it includes things like improving women's land rights, land tenure, which can have environment and climate benefits, and facilitating women's use, control of land, water, renewable energy resources, helping women to exercise their rights in natural resource management. And much of the work's linked to contributing to savings and unpaid care work for women, household food security, through, for example, energy efficient cooking technologies. Next, boosting women's groups and collective action, such an important entry point to support women to work and benefit collectively rather than individually. And this has been shown as a really vital piece in building resilience. And then finally, around boosting women's access to climate resilient livelihoods. So that's nature positive livelihoods, supporting women's small, medium enterprises, supporting women in to start businesses built on clean energy. And crucially for UNDP, when we apply these priorities, they have to be backed by just context-specific gender analysis, gender action plan to guide implementation, meaningful stakeholder consultations, including with women's groups. So next slide, and that's my final slide. Just sort of thinking more about the discussion that we might have, I think that there's many areas where I see more expertise and training, and this is just a few thoughts on some of them. That context-specific gender analysis is really so key, and linking that to specific climate and environment outcomes. I think there's a lot of space to know more about GBV linkages to climate, environment, energy. I know the UN Women Training Center has a very good gender peace and security program. That's another area, peace and security, linking that to climate action and gender, that there could be more research on. I talked about this a bit, but as we move toward implementation of countries' nationally determined contributions reports, what they're going to do to reduce carbon emissions, those gender action plans need to be delivered and implemented, need to be measured, results and impact reported on. And I think gender expertise needs to be built up there to support that work. I think I'll stop there. I really look forward to hearing from others, and I hope this has been useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kiara. It's a really interesting presentation from the institutional perspective of UNDP as well. And I hope we can bring it out more in our discussions. And finally, I'm very pleased to introduce our last speaker, Mary Dupa. Mary is Research Fellow at the ODI, the Overseas Development Institute, and she's also Gender and Social Inclusion Lead and Managing Editor of the Climate and Development Knowledge Network. And she's also the principal author of that network's publication, Gender in Climate Action Training Pack. So a very warm welcome to you, Mary, and please please let me know when you want me to change your slide, okay?
That's lovely. Thanks very much, Lucy, and welcome everyone. So nice to see you here today. You can go ahead to the next slide, Lucy. Just a quick word about CDKN. CDKN works around the world in Latin America, Africa, and South Asia to enhance the quality of life for the poorest and most vulnerable to climate change by combining knowledge, research, and technical advisory work in support of locally owned and managed policy processes. We are a demand-driven network responding to requests for support. And in fact, a common request is for training on the understanding of climate change and planning for resilience. Now, about 3 years ago, at the UNFCCC COP24 in Katowice, Poland, I, with my colleagues, decided to consult with diverse national and international bodies to ask what they thought was needed to better integrate women's empowerment and gender equality into climate policies and planning. Overwhelmingly, experts working on gender told us there are many good frameworks for gender integration, but they're not very well applied. And the emerging consensus seemed to be that people need training on how to operationalize the guidance. And for example, the very good UN Women publication from 2016 on integrating gender into climate projects. Next slide, please. So the start of CDKN's training journey was really to set us our objectives for the following 3 years, to work with climate professionals, people responsible for delivering climate programs from the national to the city level, and to increase their knowledge of how to make more gender responsive climate interventions. But really not just gender responsive, but socially inclusive as well, because we decided to take gender as our entry point, but recognize, of course, that within a given population, not only are women's needs and priorities different from men's, but women's priorities will be different according to their age and ethnicity and so on, the intersectional issues, which my fellow panelists have referred to already. Next slide, please. And you'll need to click twice, Lucy, for the first 2 boxes. Thank you. So we kicked off some initial pilot trainings on mainstreaming gender in climate action. And these were, if you click a couple more times, thanks. And these were initially for the CDKN teams themselves in the 10 focal countries where we work, but also my colleagues in the Ecuador office. And here I'd like to credit particularly Patricia Velasco, Alexandra Vasquez, and Camila Sofia. We're trying to pilot gender trainings in the context of climate action with many government officials and other stakeholders as well. And in our pilot activities, we endeavoured to demonstrate and work through examples of gender analysis and mainstreaming tools with the participants. Tools like the problem tree analysis or the philosophy of gender responsive budgeting, indeed. If you could click twice more, Lucy, thank you. However, we hit a roadblock. The roadblock was universally in this series of pilot trainings that our participants said to us, "You are going too fast. Even if we are receptive, we've signed up for this training, we are open and willing to learn about how to integrate gender analysis and apply it better in the planning and delivery of our climate projects. You need to back up a few steps because we haven't fully appreciated or been able to understand and digest why a gender approach is really needed, about how climate hazards are really affecting men and women, boys and girls, and other genders differently, about how women and men see solutions differently, about how responses to climate change are gendered in nature. And so for this reason, we did back up and we developed a very substantial training module there, shown at the top, about why a gender approach is needed, and with many what we call serious fun games and interactive exercises in it to help the participants to explore the subject more fully. And I should add that I've given you there the URL www.cdkn.org/gender training for the global set of modules that we developed. But this is a topic on why gender approaches needed to climate action, which definitely needs to be tailored, I would say, to the national or even sub-national circumstances. So you may also find on the CDKN website a very tailored version, which we have co-created with our colleagues in Ethiopia for Ethiopian use. And you can also find on our Spanish side of our website that we have in Spanish language a more Ecuadorian centered and Latin America inspired version in Spanish, which takes on board more of the issues around masculinity and gender in that region. Next slide, please. I think you have to click a couple of times, thank you. So from our roadblock, it really led us to conclude that we had somewhat misunderstood our training audience at the beginning. Sorry, if you could go back, thank you. Misunderstood the audience of climate professionals. They were educated, they had technical expertise in climate adaptation or mitigation or planning and sectoral disciplines, but that does not mean having gender-related education, understanding, and ability to apply gender-related tools. So it really led us to the conclusion that a different approach would be needed. And we've said here really a change of perspective for such training participants to help them to back up a few steps, to look at the foundational rationale for why gender responsiveness is relevant in the climate action domain, and perhaps the use of less conventional training methods to help them to better understand and explore. Next slide, please. So some of the techniques that we used, well, they start first and foremost with deepening participants' appreciation and understanding by giving diverse women the floor. You know, is a kind of a primary pillar of good communication that you should show, you should evidence material rather than tell if you want to really cut through to an audience. And in a training context, what this means is, of course, you can have diverse guest speakers, but you can also capture and show video testimonials from diverse women. And I do encourage you to look up the film which we commissioned from an Indian filmmaker, which is very effective, where the team trained village women how to use the audiovisual equipment and to record their own stories. And also more recently, the Voices from the Front Line of COVID-19 digibook, where women tell their own stories about how they're coping with climate change and COVID as well, and what kind of support they want from external actors. Next slide, please. A second technique is to give training participants a completely new perspective through the use of serious fun games. I don't have time to go today into the very energetic and appealing gender and climate game, which the Red Cross Climate Centre developed with CDKN, but you can look it up on YouTube and see a video of how it's played. Next slide, please. More recently, the Climate and Society game, which CDKN has developed, is an interactive role-play game that's about different people's vulnerabilities and capabilities in the face of climate risks, which I'll just very quickly move through right now. Lucy, just a couple more slides, please. I know I'm running out of time. Thanks. The learning objective of this game is to help participants understand women's and marginalized groups' perspectives and needs in the context of climate resilience development and disaster risk reduction by walking in other people's shoes, and to help them to explore operational solutions, really using interactive role play and asking the participants to take on characters who have got intersectional characteristics as a device to foreground the different ways that these characteristics can affect people's climate vulnerability and their capacity for creating positive change as well. Next slide, please. So the players are introduced to a fictional scenario, and this describes one in Latin America, but we have Ethiopian and South Asian versions as well. Next slide, please. And the characters all have got different ages and genders, socioeconomic status, religion, health issues, sexual orientation, education and literacy levels, and different capabilities, and of course, vulnerabilities and risks. Like Sophia, the rural migrant of the third age character shown here. Next slide, please. And so it really allows people to look through different lenses at how different kinds of people in society can contribute to climate change solutions. And the game can be used in a very versatile way. You can put people online in breakout groups to discuss the climate vulnerabilities and risks and capabilities of a specific character, or you can ask them to each have a character's profile. It was, although originally designed for in-person use, it has adapted very well for the online environment. And it also allows you to shine a spotlight on some issues which can be very difficult to discuss in the first person, like gender-based violence, and which often we have encountered in communities as an impediment to effective women's participation and climate action. But sometimes in a kind of role play situation can be easier to foreground and discuss than if it was in the first person. That really takes me to the end, so we can have a bit more discussion among us. My final slide, if you could advance to the last one, please. It's just showing, oh, sorry, I think it hasn't been fully included. That's the one, yes. It's cdken.org/gender equality. Is showing a publication that CDKen's just released with ODI, SNV, CARE and Mercy Corps, which has got some scripting in it for trainers to use in gender integration in climate action trainings to really help give the rationale for why gender is important, talking about the gender gap in development, how women are differently affected by climate change, risks of gender blind approaches, benefits of gender responsive approaches, and kind of laying out the bottom line. So I do encourage you to look that up if you want inspiration on scripting to use. And the final slide is just our contact information. So back to you, Lucy. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Mary. Such an interesting presentation, and thank you for so generously sharing all of those resources you've produced. I think we will all look at them, and I really love the use of the persona technique with those wonderful illustrations that you developed or commissioned. And I think it's really nice that you're able to use that kind of visual element, particularly, as you said, designed for in person, but now in online, we can take advantage slightly of these visual tools. So congratulations on those. I'm going to pass that back to Ruya, who has collected the questions for us, and I'm happy to ask those.
Yes, absolutely. We've got some questions, and I've taken the liberty of writing out who might be a good speaker to answer these, just because we're a little bit short on time and this might make it a little bit quicker. So I don't know if you want to go in order, maybe. So the first question is for Eunice, then Mary, then Darmista, and then Kiara. Does that sound all right to all of you?
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Okay, so Luce, do you want to read out the question maybe for Eunice?
Yes, sure. Can you just change the slide, please?
Sure. Can you see it on screen now? Oops.
Yes, but it's frozen on the Q&A slide.
Oh, sorry. Okay, hang on. Can you see it now?
Oh, still frozen.
Still frozen. Oh, no.
Maybe you start read. Yeah, there we go.
Now, okay.
So here was the question from Wangari for Eunice. From my interaction with a man leading a climate change directorate, I realized there's a serious backlash to people advocating for gender equality on climate change. There are people assuming that the focus on gender shifts the attention away from carbon emissions. Have you met such backlash in your work? And what would be your advice to gender experts who meet this kind of backlash? Great question. And I think that could be familiar to other fields as well, not just climate. So I'd be very interested in the answer.
Yeah. So actually, I have almost always received the first reaction is a backlash. Whenever I say about gender is not climate change is not gender neutral, and yeah, it is something that is there, but I think I've been consistently, whenever I go to the COP, I'm doing my presentation there with the UNFCCC, and it's always about gender and climate change. And over time, and this backlash also comes from people who are doing social sciences. It's, there are people who should be knowing, in my opinion. And over time, I think I've been, tagged as the person to go to for gender issues because of the consistency. Because I think the first time I thought, oh, maybe I should step back, but then I thought, no, I will keep saying it and doing it over and over until it becomes clear, because I think, yeah, it's the only way I can do it, or the only way I think that I can do it. And also try to explain to them why I think it's that way, why I think gender is central to climate issues, because sometimes it sounds quite vague if you tell somebody who's never heard about issues around gender, So it helps. And what I've also changed, because I'm from Kenya, what I have changed is using a feminist label and responding to maybe a Kenyan person having this conversation, because they may tend to dismiss it as feminist issues, which has a negative connotation. So then I just try to have a different framing in the conversation. Yeah, that has been my response.
Thanks very much, Eunice. Good strategies there. A question for Mary here from Juanita. I note that everyone mentioned intersectionality, and this is the fact that this is not well embedded in gender training. Do you have any thoughts on how this can be integrated from your experience with training from climate action?
Thank you for the excellent question. And Juanita, I'd love to know from you also what your thoughts are later. I think using as many examples as possible during gender training to just, show women's priorities and needs in all their diversity is really helpful. It does also depend on the context, right? So, if you, as to which aspects of intersectionality to bring to the fore. So if you're going to a community, a rural community, where everyone is of the same ethnicity, for example, maybe it's the age-related as well as sex and gender-related intersections that are most important. In other contexts, it could be a woman's marital status that has a deep bearing on her access to resources and how she is treated in society. So I think it's all of those things and being very context aware. But I would also add that I think more research on this topic would be really helpful for us to be able to pull in as evidence into our trainings. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mary, for the response. And now a question for Darmista from Petra. What kinds of champions can we consider in training for combating climate change?
Thank you. I just want to add first to what Mary said, that one of the tools we also use as part of our gender trainings to bring out the intersectionality approach in the context of climate change is using the matrix ranking tool. So wherein we actually map the different categories of people on one side and the different impacts of climate change on other, and try to see how climate change is impacting different categories of people, weighing them on a scale of 0 to 5 or 0 to 10. And I think that really brings out the whole nuances of intersectionality and how different shocks and different stresses affect different types of people differently. So that could also be one tool that could be used. In terms of champions, I think there's a range of champions that you can use. To start with, at the community level, of course, everybody looks at having community leaders as the champions. But the other three groups rather, which we have found very useful in terms of champions for gender and climate change, one has been children. So talking to children on climate change, particularly even children and adolescents for that matter, on gender and climate change, and using adolescent girls. So I just want to share this example of how we trained adolescent girls to actually do water testing in the community. And that not only helped them in terms of talking about the whole water issue and coming up as leaders and in terms of the discussion on climate change, but also in terms of breaking the gender stereotype that these kind of testing and these kind of scientific roles are only for men. So that those children and adolescent girls can be very good champions. Women from the communities, the women own leaders from the community leaders, they can be very strong champions of gender and climate change. We have actually built a whole project by creating a group of 1200 such climate champions in urban slums in India, Bangladesh and Nepal. I think they can also be a very strong champion. The third category,
is, of course, CSOs are the champions, but the third category that I also see is government departments, government officials, and within government officials, not targeting people from the climate change ministry or the environment ministry or the women and child ministry, but I see champions on gender and climate change emerging from the line departments. So for example, if you really, because line departments are struggling both in terms of having pressure to incorporate gender aspects as well as on pressure on how to incorporate climate change aspects. So if you can provide them all the information in one training and support them, they really become your champion in terms of pushing for both gender and climate change. And they work across the board. They are part of multiple negotiations within the government. So that really helps to take this forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Darmista and Darmista. And we'll finally go to a question for Kiara, which is asked by Stephanie. Are nature positive solutions always gender responsive? And do nature positive trainings consider gender? And we'll finish there as the last question, and then I'll pass over to Ruya after your response, Kiara, just to close off the webinar.
Great, and thank you for this question, Stephanie. You know, of course, I think the quick answer is that not always gender responsive, though they should be. Of course, nature positive solutions, just like any sort of climate action, should be informed by gender analysis. What we see with work in nature positive solutions that support biodiversity conservation, as we as the world face massive biodiversity loss, loss of forest stocks, increased desertification and land degradation, as that women have a really important role as users, caretakers, and beneficiaries of biodiversity and natural resources. And especially women's traditional knowledge and indigenous communities' traditional knowledge is really important to learn from for nature positive solutions. I mentioned that the Convention on Biodiversity, the Multilateral Environment Agreement for Biodiversity Conservation, has a gender action plan, and they are strengthening it for post 2020 to really prioritize women's role in biodiversity management. I think that's an important step. And of course, any kind of intervention around biodiversity conservation and nature positive solutions really has to be informed by a robust gender analysis. I hope that's helpful. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Kiara. So I'll just pass to Ruya now to close and let you know about the next steps.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And thank you so much to all four of our speakers for your wonderful presentations. They were so insightful, and I think we've answered a lot of questions. We just had one more question come in from one of our audience members, but I think we don't have time to answer it, but I will post this on the COP platform discussion forum. So what I wanted to let you know is that this virtual dialogue is part of an ongoing discussion that will continue for another 10 days. And you can continue to contribute to it by visiting the Community of Practice Forum. You can see on your screens how. And so if you go there, you can add your new questions. We can forward them to the speakers, and you can continue to give us your comments. And we're going to be compiling this event and your forum posts into a final report that will be circulated hopefully by the end of this year. And so we hope to send that to all of you who attended this webinar and to everyone who signed up and wasn't able to come. And we're also going to have a recording of this video online on UN Women's Training Center's YouTube channel. So finally, that's all from us today. Thank you so much to Eunice, Darmista, Mary, and Kiara for being with us today, and for Lucy for moderating. That was a wonderful event, and to all of you who joined us live. And we wish you a wonderful evening, and thank you so much for your time, and we hope to see you all in the virtual dialogue forum. Thank you so much.